What's up, Taylor Lee for Congress? It's you guys here, and today is a very special day. This is the first episode of a series that I intend to continue indefinitely, where I will be bringing you military news from around the world once a week. Vice Admiral Roy Kitchener, commander of Naval Surface Forces, has said at the Pentagon that the surface fleet is already bringing in new technology for high-end warfare. Well, he's really wanting the Navy to really ramp up the new Zumwalt guided missile destroyers. He wants to ramp up their training. And the reason for this is because the U.S. Navy, as of 2024, is expected to get cruise missiles. That's right. We're finally getting the much talked about CPS. That is conventional prompt strike missiles. They can travel over Mach 5, and this is a really important development for the U.S. Navy. It's been talked about for decades. And this is also really important because China and Russia are both developing their own hypersonic missiles, and some of them may already be getting fielded, though I personally doubt that. The U.S. Army is going to be getting these cruise missiles in 2023, and then the Navy is going to be getting them for submarines in 2024, and then the Zumwalt class after that. And this is why Vice Admiral Kitchener wants our Zumwalts to be training, because when they get these missiles, they're going to have to get a pretty big retrofit, and he wants commanders of these ships to be very familiar with these ships prior to getting them. That way, we're getting our training in now, and then we're getting the upgraded equipment so we can hit the ground running after we get the equipment. In other news, the Senate Armed Services Committee wants to fund the U.S. Army's entire list of unfunded requirements. The Army's wish list asked for $5.5 billion in additional money that would help reduce risk to operational readiness and protect critical modernization efforts. This additional funding is on top of the $173 billion requested by the service in fiscal year 2022, and this is to hold on to momentum that the service gained during the Trump administration. The Army stood up for its modernization priorities, but this is coming at the cost of legacy fleets. Some vehicles are going to get procured or upgraded slower than others, and some are not going to get what they were going to get originally at all. The Army is also asking for $1.1 billion additional for tactical training and soldier quality of life. Now, I had a little bit of a theory that this additional funding is going to aid the deepening of the transition of the Army to a kind of a kinder military force that relies a lot more on technology than on brute force or troop strength, and I mean that both physically and in a mental sense. And I saw a study, I'll have to find it, but it was saying that the more comfortable a warfighter is, the less effective they are in combat. And I'm pretty sure that this study was even done by the Army in the 90s, I believe. And I mean, I was in the Marine Corps, and if you guys follow my channel, you may know this already. But I just don't think soldier quality of life is going to be that big of a priority, or that it should be that big of a priority, because the Army already provides a quality of life probably well above what most Marines experience. Yet, during our last war, the U.S. Marine Corps was seeing proportionally probably more conflict. Now, I don't have exact numbers on that. The Army's a bigger force, so obviously they were probably coming into combat more often. And this isn't a pissing contest. I'm just saying there's a definitive cultural difference between the Marine Corps and between the Army. And if you've seen the news recently, you'll also see that the Army's getting rid of the shark attack. Actually, at this point, the shark attack might already be gone at the time of the posting of this video. I didn't even know what a shark attack was, but when I see it, it looks familiar. Like in the Marine Corps, the drill instructors, they all come up on you, they're yelling at you. It's designed to stress you out and get you accustomed to functioning under pressure. And the Army is no longer doing that. And the reasoning that I heard was because the shark attack and similar training methods were designed during the Vietnam era, where we had a bunch of rowdy men who were drafted and didn't want to fight, so they had to be kind of forced into it. And the Army says that now that's not needed because this is an all-volunteer force and we don't have a draft, so obviously we don't need to do that kind of rough and tumble thing anymore. But my problem is a lot of politicians see the looming danger with other rising powers, and almost every nation in the world is increasing their military spending. And we're going to see something about this a little bit later on. But I'm just saying, you see big threats. A lot of people are afraid of China. I'm going to share my opinions on that in a different video. But it doesn't change the fact that those threats are there, and we may unfortunately need to bring in a draft again. And if the Marine Corps is the only, and don't get me wrong, the Marine Corps is getting softer as well as the years go by, but if the Marine Corps is the only branch capable of functioning under stress in a combat scenario, because we have two infantry forces, that's the Army and the Marine Corps. And if the Marine Corps, a much smaller branch, is capable of dealing with this, but the bigger, technologically more advanced Army is not capable of that, then we're going to be in really big trouble. But that's kind of a digression, just getting into opinions there. This was mostly just to let you know that the Senate really wants to grant the Army this funding request, and it's a pretty big request, but the Army has good momentum. The politicians are seeing threats on the horizon, and they are granting, in my opinion, these funding requests because the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Air Force and probably the Coast Guard are all trying to modernize and optimize, and granting that funding now is going to help keep us in the lead in some things and help us get close to getting back in the lead on other things. There's finally a bipartisan effort for lawmakers to map the supply chain risks and cut Chinese-made products out of U.S. defense supplies. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps, there was a specific time where I was chosen to take inventory of the office supplies and make a list of the things we needed. And at the time, I was really disappointed because every single item in that office and that was on the list was made in China. And it was extremely difficult to find any way of having the proper department. I believe it was S4 that was running it. It was either S4 or S1. I can't remember. S4 is supply and S1 is administrative. So I reckon it was probably S4, but S1 deals with a lot of money and stuff. So I don't know. But anyway, it was really hard to find any way of getting an American-made alternative, or at least a non-Chinese alternative. And I don't know why, but I've just always been really keen on this issue. And nobody listened to me. Everybody called me crazy. I don't want to be that guy. But, you know, this has been an issue for a long time. And if we ever go to war with China, we only have ourselves to blame, because China is only powerful now because they were able to build themselves back up off of a market in the U.S. And so now we have this really big problem that some lawmakers are addressing, and that's what you'll see in this article here. Republican Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin and Democrat Elisa Slotkin from Michigan. And basically what they're saying is that, you know, all of our stuff is coming from China. There's a lot of office supplies and stuff, but these guys are more concerned with things like semiconductors and rare earth metals. So things like neodymium and stuff like that. China actually has some of the richest mines of these materials on the planet. and a lot of U.S. supply comes from China. And so, obviously, if there's an escalation with China, we are going to struggle if they decide to cut our supplies. So, before that happens, some lawmakers are trying to avoid that. They're trying to map U.S. supply chains and find alternatives, which I think is really good. And the fact that this is a bipartisan effort is also really good because it's helping to stem that division between the parties. And we're always going to have division along the party lines, and I think that this may just be delaying the inevitable. We're going to have... See, America does really well when it has a common enemy. And when it doesn't, as a republic, the way we're designed, we function best with a two-party system. Without a common enemy, the two-party system starts to eat itself. Just imagine that scenario played out, where we're in a limited escalation with China, and they make all the propellant for our ammo. I don't think if we were missing the irony that we might not be able to engage if we needed to because they provide all the propellant. I don't want our leaders to be prisoner to that kind of vulnerability, but you can't fix that unless you know about the vulnerability. And I absolutely agree with this woman. Because this is a painful process to acknowledge these vulnerabilities in the U.S. defense system, but you can't fix them if you don't know about them. So we have to deal with that painful acknowledgement. And I did a little bit of research, and it does look like the majority of U.S. military powder does come from the U.S. However, key ingredients like nitrocellulose are predominantly made elsewhere. Surprisingly, North America is only the third largest producer, according to Grandview Research, with Europe being the second largest producer of nitrocellulose, and Asia Pacific, I'll give you one guess as to who the nation there is responsible for the majority of that production. But Asia Pacific produces almost half of the world's nitrocellulose. So you can imagine that if there's shortages for whatever reason elsewhere, that companies who make powder for the U.S. military on U.S. soil, if they can't get those resources from their main supplier, and I'm going to guess that it's probably China, if they have that big of a market share, they're probably also producing it at a bit of a discount. And so if that's the case, then there goes half the supply right there. And now suddenly we have to look for an alternative. And if those supply chains are already stressed from an ongoing conflict or from competition with other nations, then it's gonna be game over. We will not be able to sustain a conflict if we don't produce our own materials. And this really pisses me off too, because how do we as a country, the United States has the fourth largest nation by area and the third largest nation by population on the planet. We have the resources and space to build anything we want. We have access to nearly every single kind of resource on the planet because of our large area and the manpower to take advantage of it and protect it. But we don't. We're outsourcing a lot of labor to different countries, which you can make your globalist arguments all you want about how, this capitalist system is bringing people out of poverty elsewhere. But I don't think that's worth the risk associated with increased reliance on other nations and decreased security in your own supply chains. Like Slotkin says here, if your opponent controls the majority of your powder production, how are you going to be able to sustain a conflict? You can't. And if the enemy takes advantage of that, or your opponent, I wouldn't really call China an enemy right now, then they can take the initiative and make some significant gains before we're able to change over some of our other production capacity to that. And normally what that would entail is private corporations will say, okay, we'll sign a contract and we'll start producing that. But sometimes that can take years to get the infrastructure changed over. During dire situations, I'm sure, just like in World War II, we can get companies geared for that in months. But still, if China doesn't have the ability to project power very far, but if the fight isn't sustainable and China decides to project onto Japan, and this could be anywhere, China could decide to stop selling us powder while we're fighting Iran or Russia. I'm not saying that I want those nations to be at odds with us, but if that's the situation, then that's just a problem, Apparently, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have been fighting Houthi forces in Yemen, who are backed by Iran. The conflict has left 80% of the population needing aid, according to the UN. Because of this, Italy has placed an embargo on the sale of munitions and missiles to both parties, being the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And what's really funny here, and I'm sorry to the people of Italy for this, but the UAE is evicting Italian forces from Al Minhad Air Base. And Italy has already pulled out all of its aircraft, and it just has a little bit of material left to collect. But this is going to complicate things for Italy as they try to pull out of Afghanistan with the United States. And it also means that Italy is going to struggle more to be able to project its power into the Middle East. And so this is just an interesting article I found. I thought you guys might enjoy it as well and get some diversity in the content here. Now, in other news, apparently the top 100 defense companies in the world have had their revenue climb for the 5th consecutive year. And this echoes reports that I've seen elsewhere, and I'm sure that most of us have heard about, that nations are constantly investing more and more into their armed forces. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that there's a rearming campaign across the world. Most forces, like the Philippines, for example, are trying to modernize their militaries, and this is an expensive process. However, there are some indications that some nations are not only rearming, but they're building up their militaries. And I think as the U.S. sees its influence decrease globally, and I think that's a political issue, as we have more internal conflict, our influence across the world is decreasing. And as nations see that the U.S. is less and less able to maintain global stability, nations are more inclined to take their defense into their own hands. And especially in the Pacific, where China is being aggressive, we are seeing other nations respond to this. And you get this trickle in every direction. As China builds up its military, the nations around it obviously get concerned because China shares borders with 14 other nations, and it has contested territory with every single one of them. So obviously, its neighbors, seeing China with a large military, are a little concerned, and when we have things like skirmishes with Indian forces in the Himalayas, this just serves to validate those fears. So for 2020, the top 100 companies, the budgets for all of them combined was at $551 billion, and that's up 5% from the previous year. And this is really interesting because 2020 is the year of the virus, and the industry was still able to succeed despite having social distancing and people staying home and working from home. We still see a 5% increase from the previous year in this industry, and that's pretty remarkable. Now, something really important to note here is that the top 10 corporations in this list represent more than 50% of the defense revenues for the year, and the top 25 account for nearly 75%. So it's not like there's 100 companies investing $50 billion each. It's more that there's about 15 investing, $350, $400 billion. I'm not a big fan of using expenditure as a end-all be-all for determining dominance, but the list is predominantly Western corporations. There's only 2 Russian companies in the top 50, and U.S. companies have 6 corporations represented in the top 10 firms. And there's 50 U.S. companies in the list altogether that represent approximately 56% of the list's total revenue. There are 24 firms from Europe, and that does not include Russia. And China is a little bit of a surprise for me here. They have 7 companies, all of them in the top 25, and their combined total is almost $100 billion. So that's almost 20% of this combined revenue. This list includes a lot of familiar names like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and some other companies that you may have not heard of, like Leonardo, China North Industries Group Corporation Limited, Thales, or that's a French company, so maybe it's Thales. I'm not sure. Give me some wine, and I might speak better. And Hanwha. Hey guys, thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, don't forget to dislike and unsubscribe, and leave a hateful comment. See you next time.
Space Rangers, intergalactic war on terror. We don't worry about collateral damage or error.
'Cause we're nuking hate, we're spreading freedom and liberty.